Good morning and welcome to Sierra Foothills Unitarian Universalists. For our service on Reimagining the Future, our congregation is served by the Reverend A.J. Van Tyne, and I'm Cindy Whitson, Worship Associate. We are joined by Patty Leffridge, our Music Director, and Adrian, our Director of Religious Education. And we are joined by all of you. You are all welcome here today. In the beauty of languages, cultures, and skin tones that come together in your uniqueness, you are welcome here. In all the ways you experience and express gender, you are welcome here. In the beauty that is who you love and how you love, you are welcome here. In the beauty that is in all the varied ways you move through and interact with the world, you are welcome here. With all the religious and ethical traditions that inform your spiritual life, you are welcome here. Whether you come feeling despair or hope for our world and its future, you are welcome here. No matter how long you've been away, nor how soon you'll return, you are welcome here. You are invited to join us with open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. We welcome you today.
Thank you, Cindy. I would like to add my own welcome to that, especially welcoming any newcomers with us today. Our services are a little bit different each week, so do come back a few times to get to know us. And if you did not see in the letter that went on Thursday, it is with a heavy heart that I announced my departure from SFUU effective at the end of the year, as my wife's sensitivity to smoke and the air quality here requires that we move back to the East Coast. So please do read the letters if you haven't, the one that I wrote and one from the board accompanied it as well to give a fuller picture of what comes next. So now I invite Cindy to begin our worship by leading us in lighting our chalices.
We light our chalice with these words from Reverend Gretchen Haley. Cast your vision here in the middle of the hardest moment, the turning of the new year. This life with so much worth saving, this fragile faith. For the children born now into the world as it is, with the threat of war and whole continents burning still, while the memory lingers of holidays chaotic and miraculous. And to this day, offer the vision you've tried to talk yourself down from, your wildest dreams, your audacious aims, the beauty that whispers to you to follow and build and become. For this world coming undone by distraction and greed and fear, this world divided by made-up borders, fake fights, and all that needs forgiveness. Here, stir up your steadfast hope, your resolute clarity of what remains possible. Be generous with your dreaming and brave. All paths to the future are born in this courage of imagination, this willingness to shed, to salvage, to start again, to be this blessing for each other, to be this blessed. Come, let us worship together. Please join me now in singing hymn number 389, Gathered Here.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here
now I'd like to invite Adrian Dills to give our story for all ages.
Good morning, everyone. Today, I would like to share a story about how sometimes our first thought is not our best thought. It takes a little more contemplation, imagination, and experiencing to figure out what's really going on. Our story for this morning is called Not Norman, a goldfish story. When I got Norman, I did not want to keep him. I wanted a different kind of a pet, not Norman. Norman is a fish. I wanted a pet who could run and catch, or one who could climb trees and chase things. Soft, furry pet to sleep on my bed at night, not Norman. All Norman does is swim around and around and around and around and around and around and around. This is it, Norman, I decide. I'm trading you in for a good pet. Norman doesn't move. Not even a fin twitches. How can I trade him in like this? No one will want a sorry-looking fish in a gunky bowl. When I do drop Norman into his nice clean bowl, he starts dipping and flipping and flapping his fins around. He looks so goofy, I have to laugh. Don't think that just because you made me laugh, I'm going to keep you, I tell him. Tomorrow, you're out of here. Norman blows a stream of bubbles. The next day, I take Norman to school with me. If I talk him up real good during show and tell, maybe someone will want him. On the way there, we see my friend Austin. Austin has a real cool dog and 7 puppies. Want to swap one of your pups for Norman, I ask? Who's Norman, asks Austin. My goldfish, I say. By the time I rescue Norman, half of his water is gone. I'm sorry, I tell Norman when we get to school. I'm really sorry. He just stares at me, googly-eyed. Finally, it's my turn to show and tell. Just as I start to talk about goldfish, Emily shouts, Jenny's gone! Who let my snake loose? It's never a good sign. Does anyone hear the story about how I got Norman? Does anyone even ask to hold his bowl? No. They're all jumping and screaming and chasing the snake. Not Norman. He's looking right at me. Thanks for listening, I tell him. That afternoon, we go to my music lesson. As soon as it's over, I'm taking Norman to the pet store. I take out my tuba and begin to play. Bom, 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 ba, bom, bom, ba, boo. I glance over at Norman. He's swaying back and forth. Goo, glue, glue, glug, he mouths. Look, Norman's singing, I say. Pay attention, snaps Maestro, and play the proper notes. Maestro makes me stay for extra practice. By the time my lesson is over, it is too late to go to the pet store. Don't think that just because you like my music, I'm going to keep you, I tell Norman. He glugs. That night, I am sound asleep when screech, screech. What is that noise? Scratch, scritch, screech. Yikes, there's something at the window. Then out of the corner of my eye, I spot Norman. He isn't scared. He isn't swimming around in circles either. He glugs and gives me a little wave. I am not alone. Together, Norman and I slide open the curtains. It was just a broken tree branch. Thanks for watching out for me, Norman. On Saturday, I take Norman to the pet store, just like I said I would. I look at the cats and the dogs and the birds and the snakes. I look at the hamsters and the mice and the lizards too. They all look like good pets, but they're not Norman. When I got Norman, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep him. But now, even if I could pick any pet in the whole world, I wouldn't trade him. Not Norman. The end.
Thank you, Adrian. I now invite Cindy to offer her reflection.
Hello. I'm happy to be here. I wanted to share something with you before I start this reflection. Yesterday, when I was writing my final draft, I was listening to the radio. The first song I heard was Imagine by John Lennon. And I cried. I cried. But onward. Imagination allows humans to create Technicolor movies, Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, life-saving medications, and it allows humans to create Birkenau, to put children in cages, to kindle a wildfire on purpose. It is the stuff of dreams and nightmares, and we all have such capacity. I'm well known in my family and probably to coworkers of my past careers as a person with a good imagination, a person who has a huge number of suggestions, ideas, advice, a person who has this advice for everybody else to do. I can imagine up a storm, a flood of ideas to fix this or that problem, or to just entertain myself. I don't usually have a problem with imagining. My obstacle is generally in the implementing and making my imagined happen. I imagine this might be an issue for some of you, and that both imagining positive change and making the reimagined happen has become challenging in our time of isolation, in the years of government policies that may have defied our comprehension and brought such sadness, sorrow, and anger to our thinking. So, how might we reimagine the future after this pandemic? As I prepared for this reflection, I have read and read and read, thought and thought and thought, and written and written and written thousands of words to get this reflection right. I dove into big ideas, system changes, large-scale reform. I could have chosen to tell you about police departments that are sending or working towards sending care from mental health experts instead of guns and force. I've got about 5,000 words on that topic, maybe some other day. This systems change is so necessary, but so daunting, so daunting. It left me feeling hopeless. Fortunately, I had an aha moment and realized that all of this writing and thinking and worrying had become an obstruction to imagining. I was overwhelmed by suggestions, ideas, and advice. I needed to rest. And then after a reset, I decided to commit to discovering what brought joy to my imagination. I looked for examples online of others that are engaging in reimagining with a smaller R. I looked for small ideas that I thought have a chance of adding to the formation of and solution of bigger systems. So, thanks to TED Talks, I will share the story of Philippa Hughes, a first-generation Vietnamese American woman who decided to openly invite people of different political viewpoints to her home for dinner. I refer you to her TED Talk for details, caveats, her successes, and challenges. But in a nutshell, after trying several different dinner models, she decided that the guests would have to agree to abide by several rules. I won't go into all the rules, just the first and ultimately probably the most important one. Guests were paired self-identified as liberal or conservative. The requirement was that they had to spend the first 15 minutes telling each other a story about when they were their best selves. What stories were being told and, importantly, listened to The participant enthusiasm for continuing grew and expanded to 45 minutes. Telling stories seemed to make people seem more human to each other. The expectation was not that one side or the other agreed. The result was that Philippa and attendees relaxed, changed perspectives, and practiced understanding that the other can be kind, loving, and their stories worth hearing. A caveat, of course, is this COVID restrictions make the idea one that I can only plan for right now. I trust that our future will not be like our present. We will be able to gather, to share food, and make people welcome in our homes and other gathering places. This idea is not a quick fix, nor is it revolutionary. On the other hand, take a moment and just let your imagination loose on this idea. Thousands of people doing this regularly for a year, it may be possible to start healing our divide, one conversation at a time, multiplied by hundreds of thousands of conversations over weeks, months, and years. This idea brought me joy, brought alive my imagination. I think it's because it might be doable on a personal level. It's not a systems change, which we need. It is an opportunity for change, human to human, and humans, after all, make up the system. My takeaway from the process of writing this reflection, one big obstacle to reimagining for change was taking on too much for me in the moment, leaving me feeling immobilized and overwhelmed by the task. Resting, and then imagining what I could do, one person, one gathering at a time, the way for me became clear and left me with hope and intention.
Thank you, Cindy. In this community of mutual care, we celebrate the great joys of life together and help share the burden of sorrows and grief. As such, each week we share specific joys and sorrows from the lives of our members. If you have a joy or sorrow that you would like shared on Sunday, you can email joysandsorrows@mysfuu.org at any time with what you would like to be said. If you have something on your heart this morning that you haven't emailed but would like to share now, you may type it into the chat bar for others to read. I invite you now to a time of meditation, reflection, and prayer. Great mystery which grounds us and surrounds us. Divine presence known by many names and in many ways. Be with us as we navigate this and each of our days, as we hold our joys alongside our sorrows, the complexity and fullness of our emotion, the grief of traumas past and those continuing, and the relief of new chapters, new beginnings. We are grateful this week for the precious gift that is a democracy with a peaceful transition of power. We know how fragile it is indeed as we still process the implications of the insurrection on January 6th. And on the other side of the world, as tens of thousands protest in Russia against their government's attempts to quell dissent, arresting thousands. We pray for democracy and self-determination and freedom for all those across the globe. And we are grateful for the precious vaccines as those in our community begin to receive those inoculations this month. The first steps in a marathon to bring healing and safety to the community at large, even as we brace ourselves for possibly the worst of this pandemic yet to come. As even New Zealand confirms its first community spread case in months, likely due to the increased spreading of the recent mutations. Within our own community, we rejoice with new life, new stages of life embarked upon, with recoveries from illness and surgeries, and we mourn those ailments that still linger, and all the new diagnoses, new realities to adjust to. We hold all these in our community as our hearts join with compassion. In particular, we lift up these joys and sorrows from the community. The Kerners share that their second son, Isaac, accepted a position as a mechanical engineer for an autoclave manufacturer in Santa Clarita. He starts Monday. We join the Kerners in their joy and excitement. Leah Florence shares a sorrow that her parents, sister, brother-in-law, and grandma have all tested positive for COVID-19. So far, most of them only have mild symptoms, thankfully, but Leah's grandmother is in the hospital in critical condition. She will most likely pass on soon. We hold Leah and her grandmother and her family in our hearts, and Leah expresses her gratitude to have a community to share concerns and troubles with during a trying time. Holding these sorrows and joys in love and light, including all those left unspoken, I invite you to continue the compassionate spirit of reflection, meditation, and prayer as we hear hymn 123, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the land, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me
And I invite Cindy to offer the reading for this morning.
The reading is The Blessings of Imperfection by J. Peter Fleck. And in this, he starts out with a quote from Lewis Thomas, the author of The Medusa and the Snail. Here's the quote. We have evolved scientists, and so we know a lot about DNA, but if our kind of mind has been confronted with the problem of designing a similar replicating molecule, we'd never have succeeded. We would have made one fatal mistake. Our molecule would have to be perfect. The capacity to blunder slightly is the real marvel of DNA. Without this special attribute, we would still be anaerobic bacteria and there would be no music. Peter Fleck goes on to say, in his book, Lewis Thomas's book, The Medusa and the Snail, the biologist Lewis Thomas observes that we humans are built to make mistakes, coded for error, that is, for being imperfect. We learn, as we say, by trial and error. Why not trial and rightness or trial and triumph? And he concludes, the old phrase puts it that way because it is, in real life, the way it is done. In other words, progress requires error. What persuasive reasoning. Our response to imperfection, he seems to say, is the very thing that can make us more perfect. Indeed, the capacity to leap across mountains of information to land lightly on the wrong side represents the highest of human endowment, assuming, of course, that you do something about having landed on the wrong side. This principle does not apply to humans only. It permeates creation. It is the very stuff of which evolution is made. Take the amphibians. The first one that crawled out of the water onto the land may not have done so because its feet were very strong, but because its gills were so weak. The imperfection of its gills made that first amphibian into an animal of higher order. But one can imagine its parents' distress at having a child that was so conspicuously unable to live a normal aquatic life. A child with which there was obviously something wrong, and no one can imagine how it was jeered at by its peers. Nor did that first amphibian have any idea of what was happening to it. It had no idea of its wrongness had led it into a betterness.
Thank you for such beautiful music, Patty. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato imagined that besides our realm of material existence, there existed a realm of ideas, where each thing that existed in our material world received its form and essence from its ideal form, the perfect, unchanging ideal or concept that undergird it. This conception of perfection as meaning unchanging was also applied by early Christian theologians to their concept of God, assuming that if God were to be perfect, then he must be unchanging and constant. And yet, the world that I observe and live in and experience seems to reflect that change is the only constant. And I'm not sure that that makes this world any less perfect. For it is through imperfections that change is possible. And change is how things get better. How things can even possibly get closer to perfection in so far as that idea carries weight. It is a bit of a paradox, I suppose. Peter Fleck wrote further in that selection, humans are the only creatures on this earth to whom it is given to be aware of the wrongness, the error, the imperfection in themselves, and to react to that wrongness in a way that tends to overcome it. And if it cannot be overcome, to accept it as inevitable and to live with it, which I would argue is its own kind of overcoming and transforming. He finishes, the resolve to make one's peace and live with inevitable imperfection is a creative act. When we are faced with an imperfection, a blunder, an obstacle, an error, we can either bemoan the occurrence as bad, write it off, try to move on to the next thing, or we can open ourselves to imaginative thinking. We can try to see how the error, that difference, the changing, can be worked with, lived with, harnessed even, and massaged into change for the better. Progress requires error. Perhaps there's a time in your life when you were faced with a difficulty, an obstacle, an unexpected pet like Norman, or perhaps a mistake by your own actions. Whatever it was, that it shook up your normal routines and reoriented the direction of your life. How did this imperfection maybe lead you into reimagining what was possible? Certainly, the biggest example, the biggest imperfection that we face today that comes to mind, or at least most immediate, most noticeable, right, is of course the COVID-19 pandemic and all that it means. By Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, well, it's actually good that the pandemic happened, because of course it is a very painful and terrible thing. It is worth all the grief and lament. It is worthy of all the grief and lament that we can muster for it, as over 400,000 have died in our country and over 2 million worldwide. And we may only be at the cusp of the worst, as mutations abound and vaccine distribution stalls. And yet, this great tragedy may indeed be a catalyst for truly positive change if we can come together as a society and learn lessons we should have learned long ago. As the vaccines begin and the end becomes in sight, slightly closer, even if still farther off than we would like, it's an appropriate time to imagine what comes next for society, or more accurately, to reimagine the future. As with each new day that we live, each new event that happens, good or bad, we are asked again to reimagine the future that we are striving and working towards. What will the world look like? How will things work in the post pandemic? A hope dear in my heart is that we will see the role of healthcare in keeping individuals and entire communities safe and healthy. I certainly hope the collective experience that we're all going through encourages people everywhere to see the value in simply having universal healthcare. To me, it's a question of expanding the logic. If we understand and accept that everyone deserves the right to the vaccine paid for by the government, then that is good for their health and collective health. What about making sure that everyone has the right to insulin for people who need it? Chemotherapy. What about all aspects of healthcare, both preventive and otherwise? And what of the glaring inequalities of our society that have been made only more prominent in this pandemic? Inequality in access to healthcare, in access to education, in treatment by police. As has been said, the virus does not discriminate, but we do. And it's high time we took a serious look as a nation and took steps to make real change. Other changes we can imagine may be less dramatic, but still impactful. We now live in a much more virtually savvy world, and there is no turning back. Working from home, at least for the white collar sector, means that young professionals can have thriving careers while moving back to rural areas or smaller cities where the cost of housing and living is cheaper. This will reshape the density of America and the political landscape. And of course, congregational life in churches across America will be reimagined. What can we expect? Even with vaccines, the potential of the virus to continue to spread will be real, and there will always be vulnerable people and people who are not able to receive the vaccine. And so we may still be limited in what we can do when we return in person. Social distancing of 6 feet or more may still be in place. Mask wearing, of course, is a given in public now and will continue for a while. Churches probably won't be able to all hold hands at the end of a service. In fact, I know of one person who visited our congregation a few times before, just in the last winter, just before the COVID came in, and she left the service before services ended each time because she was concerned about germs when we held hands. And of course, that was before the pandemic. Likewise, as much as we may want to when we first gather together, we may not be able to hug each other. Again, the social distancing. So, what we imagine, the ways that we will create community, will have to be reimagined. We have to get creative and find ways to care for one another and express our deep love and concern. And again, the virtual Pandora's box has been opened and cannot close. I and all my colleagues are assuming that the expectation will be that worship services going forward will be available streamed online morning of, whether through Zoom or Facebook Live or some other medium or combination. This will create so many more opportunities for accessibility and outreach as we take the beauty and magic of an in-person worship service and translate it into being hybridized and online as well. And many have commented that committee meetings can continue to be held on Zoom in the evenings to cut down on vehicle emissions and to save commute time, again, making participation in congregational life even more accessible. And of course, the future of this particular religious community, this beautiful congregation that is Sierra Foothills Unitarian Universalists. You will be stepping into the next great phase of congregational life without me as your minister. I am deeply grateful for everyone's understanding and grace as Ada and I follow through with this very difficult but very clear decision we've had to make. Know that I share in your sadness and disappointment that I was not able to serve a longer term here. And that I do take your well wishes gratefully as I step into the next phase in my ministry, wherever that may take me. I am, of course, still your minister through the end of this church year, through June. And so I will have been with you for 2 years, all told. But what a 2 years it has been. I don't know about you, but for me it feels both like it's been much longer than 2 years, and in other ways much shorter. And that's of course because close to 75% of my tenure here will have been more than 3/4 will have been virtual ministry during this historic pandemic. This is a bittersweet time for me because while I grieve the loss of being with you all in person, not having been able to do that for most of my time here, I also feel very proud and positive about what this community has accomplished enduring the challenges of this past year. And you should feel proud too. You all leaned right into learning new technology and gauging and re-gauging your expectations as the virus unfolded. You pivoted quickly and embraced, or at least tolerated, virtual worship and committee meetings, making the best of the situation before you. You held not one but two extremely entertaining auction events, providing community engagement and connection while also supporting the budget of the congregation. You've rallied together, called to check in with one another, supported each other through all the celebrations and grief that come with the passage of time. More complex in some ways, but also essentially the same in the context of the pandemic restrictions. People still have birthdays, weddings, you've celebrated weddings and new life. We've honored our beloved dead. In short, you have been a community. The exact specifics and logistics and the way that you have expressed that have shifted. But as a community grounded in love and mutual care, you have never faltered in your commitment to one another. And pandemic aside, you all have stepped up to take care of the institutions of this community to make sure that the mission is carried out and that there is a beacon of liberal and progressive religion in Placer County. You answered the second ask last year, the financial ask last year in January, raising $25,000 in just a matter of days to fill last year's budget deficit. You completed a healthy pledge drive in the spring for this year's budget. You've said yes to new leadership roles and new committees as worship associates. There's a beautiful culture of lay reflections here, like what Cindy shared today. It's absolutely top notch, and I know you will only continue to grow and deepen in your sharing and your vulnerability and your support of one another through worship. You also organized getting a pastoral care committee together just in time to run the phone call program during COVID. We've sent delegates and attendees to the UU Association's General Assembly in the summer, and coming back with excitement and energy, you've organized small group ministries and adult RE opportunities, as you heard in the announcements that are unfolding now and continuing. Administratively, we've migrated from an old, difficult, not entirely secure congregational database management system to a paid, professional, more user-friendly system called Breeze, which will be rolled out more officially in the coming months. And at the same time, we began to use Google Suites for our email and committee documents and drive sharing. Your administrator, Vicky, definitely deserves a lot of appreciation for getting these new systems set up and learning them quite quickly on the job. And we've deeply engaged the topic of dismantling white supremacy culture as it shows up in Unitarian Universalism, as well as in the uprising and protests of the past summer in our national context. Although the November election has repudiated the worst of white supremacy for the moment, rest assured that there is still a lot of work to do to understand and undo the deeply entrenched, even the foundational systems of inequality and exploitation that are at the core of our nation and all the communities and institutions that are part of and make up American society. I know that the timing of my departure is difficult, and it may feel like a step backwards even as we take steps closer to returning to in-person programming, vaccinations pending. But I assure you that you are all in a really strong position to hit the ground running when it's time. You've always been a congregation that understands the minister is not the congregation and have had a strong sense of lay leadership and lay ownership of the mission and programming of this congregation. There is a bright future for Unitarian Universalism and progressive religion in Placer County and in Auburn, and I will be recommending you highly to any minister interested in serving you. So this week has held a lot for us. The end of one presidency, the beginning of a new administration, new vaccinations for some of our members who've qualified, have received their first vaccinations, and my resignation has happened. There is a lot to reimagine. An exciting future is coming at us very quickly. With all the imperfections, the challenges, the blunders, both personal and public, that are facing you, I want you to take a moment and reflect. How are you reimagining the near future? How are you reimagining the future of your own household and how you will live your life and conduct yourself? How are you reimagining the future of this community as it enters a new stage? How are you reimagining the future of our country as we reckon with the damage of the past 4 years and the past 400 years? How are you reimagining the future that we share as a global community, interconnected and interdependent and in crisis? It can all be very overwhelming, like Cindy shared. While there are times to lean into the messiness, to get lost in all the possibilities, both hopeful and distressing, I think that most of the time we would do better to take things one step at a time, grounded in the present moment, but allowing the challenges, the imperfections that we face in that moment to open us up towards greater imaginative thinking rather than less. Sometimes I think the best way to keep our imaginations open is to avoid locking ourselves into our initial reactions to a challenge, obstacle, or event, as the owner of Norman did in the story. When we practice seeing things as they are without assigning a final analysis, we can remain open to the possibilities of the future. To illustrate this, before our closing hymn, I want to leave you with a favorite story of mine, the story of the Taoist farmer. Once upon a time, a farmer and his son had a beloved stallion who helped the family earn a living on their farm. One day, the horse ran away, and the neighbors exclaimed, "Your horse ran away! What awful luck!" The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few days later, the horse returned home, leading 6 wild horses back to the farm as well. The neighbors shouted out, "Your horse has returned and brought several horses home with him. What wonderful luck!" The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." Later that week, the farmer's son tried to saddle and ride one of these wild horses, and she threw him to the ground, breaking his leg. The village neighbors cried, "Your son broke his leg. What awful luck!" The farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few weeks later, soldiers from the National Army marched through town, recruiting all the able bodied boys for the army. They did not take the farmer's son, still recovering from his injury. The friends shouted, "Your boy is spared! What tremendous luck! How awesome!" To which the farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." that, please join me in closing hymn 1052, The Oneness of Everything.
Far beyond the grasp of hands, or light to meet the eye, past the reaches of mind, where find the key to nature's harmony in an architecture so entwined. Like the bird whose patterns grace the sky and carry on, who join in love expanding. The message of peace will rise in flight, taking the weight of the world upon its wings. In the oneness of everything, peace is in the dance of trees who stir before the first breath of wind is yet perceived. Trust in the song becoming one with the dance, and all mysteries can be believed. Songs of lives long past that touch our own are written in the earth ever giving, and now to maintain the harmony gives to us all lives with living, for the oneness of everything. Still we seek to find a truth that we might understand and reduce to terms defined. Vast and immeasurable time and space, also overwhelmingly designed. Oh, passing years, just might I know the faith that winters in the hearts to be reborn in spring, to hear and to feel the pulse of life enters my soul as a song to sing of the oneness of everything.
It's often said that the offering is the sacrament of the free church. That is to say, everything this congregation is and has is only what we bring to it: our time, our talents, and our treasures.
In person, this is embodied by the powerful ritual of literally passing the plate and chipping in. With our online services, however, we ask that you contribute to our collection after the service by going to our website and using text to give. As part of our ethic of generosity, we also split our monthly collection with a local community organization aligned with our values. This month, the Share the Plate recipient is the Auburn Interfaith Food Closet, which provides nutritious food to individuals and families in the Auburn area who do not have sufficient resources to purchase it themselves. Thank you for your generosity. So in benediction, I offer these words from Starhawk. We are all longing to go home to some place we have never been. a place half remembered and half envisioned, we can only catch glimpses of from time to time. Community. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion without having the words catch in our throat. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up as we enter. Voices will celebrate us, with us, whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done. Arms to hold us when we falter, a circle of healing, a circle of friends. Someplace where we can be free. Please join me in the words to extinguish our chalice. As we go forth, may we carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. Blessed be.